38 minutes before the surgeon was scheduled to cut the cancer out of my body, my husband texted me to say he wanted a divorce. I am not built for a sick wife. The message read, glowing glaringly bright on my phone screen in the dim light of the preoperative room. I was gasping for air, trying to process the absolute cruelty of his timing, when the stranger in the bed next to mine slid a pristine white napkin past the edge of our shared privacy curtain. "If I survive this, marry me," I joked through my breathless tears, grasping the napkin like a lifeline. The deep, resonant voice from the other side of the curtain simply replied, "Okay." Just seconds later, my nurse walked in, froze entirely in her tracks upon seeing the man interacting with me, and stammered, "Do you know who he really is?" "My name is Clara. I am 32 years old, working as a data analyst, and my life shattered completely on a Tuesday morning while wearing a drafty hospital gown." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever faced a betrayal that forced you to reinvent yourself entirely. My husband Brent had kissed my forehead 20 minutes earlier and claimed he was going down to the parking garage to move his car. I believed him completely because I had spent the last 4 years trusting his every word. Instead of returning to hold my hand while I faced stage 2 melanoma surgery, he cowardly hid in his car and sent a text message that destroyed our marriage. I stared at the words until the letters blurred together. There was no build-up, no previous discussion about separation, just the immediate gut punch of his cowardice hitting me precisely when I was most vulnerable. The sterile smell of the hospital room suddenly became suffocating. My chest tightened as a full-blown panic attack seized my lungs. The heart monitor attached to my finger began to beep rapidly, betraying my escalating terror to the entire ward. I clutched the thin cotton blanket, trying to draw a breath, but the air felt too thick, too heavy. I was alone, facing a potentially deadly disease, and the man who had vowed to stand by me in sickness and in health had abandoned me for his own comfort. That was when the napkin slid across the smooth surface of the partition table. The hand offering it was steady and tanned, wearing a watch that caught the harsh fluorescent light. "Take a slow breath," the voice from the other side of the curtain instructed. The tone was incredibly calm, carrying an authority that somehow demanded compliance without being aggressive. "Focus on the texture of the paper. Count backwards from 5. I followed his instructions blindly, focusing all my analytical mind on the rough grain of the napkin and the steady rhythm of his counting. It grounded me just enough to stop the room from spinning. I wiped my face, feeling a mixture of profound embarrassment and dark irony. That was when I made the desperate joke about marrying him if I survived the operating table. When he responded with a simple, confident, "Okay," a strange wave of calm washed over me. I had no idea who this man was, or why he was in the preoperative ward with me, but his steady presence provided more comfort in those 3 minutes than my husband had offered in the entire month since my diagnosis. The heavy door to our shared room swung open before I could formulate a response to his surprising agreement. My nurse stepped inside carrying a tray of pre-surgical medications and a clipboard. She was usually a bustling, talkative woman, but the moment she pulled back the edge of the privacy curtain to check my vitals and caught sight of the man lying in the bed next to mine, she froze entirely. The clipboard slipped slightly in her grip. She looked from him to me, her eyes wide with undisguised shock. "Do you know who he really is?" she whispered, leaning down close to my ear as she adjusted my blood pressure cuff. I shook my head, feeling the sedative she had just injected into my intravenous line begin to take effect. A warm, heavy fog started rolling into my brain, making my limbs feel like lead. I tried to turn my head to get a proper look at the stranger who had talked me down from my panic attack, but my neck refused to cooperate. The nurse quickly regained her professional composure, though her hands were noticeably trembling as she prepared my bed for transport. The surgical transport team arrived moments later, efficiently unlocking the wheels of my bed and maneuvering me toward the hallway. As they rolled me past the end of the privacy curtain, I fought the heavy sedation to keep my eyes open. I caught a fleeting glimpse of dark hair and sharp features before the hallway lights blurred into a continuous white streak above me. My final conscious thought before the anesthesia pulled me into complete darkness was not about the cancer they were about to cut out of my skin, nor was it about the husband who had cowardly abandoned me in the parking garage. It was a lingering, burning curiosity about the mystery man behind the curtain and the absolute certainty in his voice when he accepted my absurd proposal. The hook was set deep in my mind, waiting for me to wake up. Waking up from general anesthesia is a brutal, disorienting experience. Pain radiated from my shoulder where the surgeon had removed the melanoma, throbbing in time with my sluggish heartbeat. I blinked against the harsh lighting of the recovery room, trying to piece together the fragmented memories of the morning. For a brief, hopeful second, my drug-addled brain convinced me that the text message from Brent had just been a terrible nightmare induced by pre-surgical anxiety. I slowly turned my head, expecting to see my husband sitting in the visitor chair reading a magazine and waiting for me to open my eyes. Instead, I was greeted by the overwhelming scent of expensive floral perfume and the sharp clacking of designer heels. My mother-in-law Barbara was standing over my bed. She was not holding a bouquet of flowers or a cup of water or offering any words of comfort. Her face was set in a rigid mask of disapproval, and she was clutching a thick manila folder tightly against her chest. Even through the haze of pain medication, the cold reality of my situation crashed down on me. Brent was truly gone. He had not even bothered to wait until I was safely out of surgery before sending his mother to do his dirty work. The lingering hope that I had desperately clung to evaporated completely, leaving behind a chilling sense of clarity. I braced myself, pushing the button to raise the head of my bed, ignoring the sharp protest of my stitches. I stared at Barbara, refusing to let her see my fear. She adjusted her silk scarf, looking at the medical equipment surrounding me with visible distaste rather than maternal concern. "I see you are finally awake," Barbara stated flatly, making no move to approach the bedside or offer a comforting hand. She dropped the manila folder onto my lap directly over my thin hospital blanket. "Brent is exhausted from the emotional toll your illness has taken on him. He needed space for his own mental well-being, so I am here to handle the practical matters." I stared at the folder, my analytical mind processing the sheer audacity of her statement. He abandoned me via text message 38 minutes before surgery, and she was framing him as the victim. "Open it," she commanded, tapping her perfectly manicured fingernail against the paper. Inside were legal documents heavily dense with financial jargon. As a data analyst, dealing with complex contracts was my daily bread and butter. It took me less than 30 seconds to understand what she had placed before me. It was a quitclaim deed. Barbara was demanding that I sign over my 50% equity in the house Brent and I had purchased together. "You have always been a drain on Brent's true potential," Barbara continued, her voice dripping with venom. "Ever since you got sick, you have become nothing but a financial liability. My son is on the verge of a massive corporate promotion, and he cannot be weighed down by your mounting medical debt or your physical limitations. Sign the house over so he can secure his own future." Her cruel remarks laid bare years of subtle mistreatment, revealing that she had always viewed me not as a daughter-in-law, but as a disposable income source to fund her son's lifestyle. "We bought that house with my down payment," I said, my voice raspy from the breathing tube, but growing stronger with every word. "I worked 70-hour weeks to secure our mortgage while Brent was still figuring out his career path. You think you can just erase my financial contribution because my body dared to develop cancer?" Her eyes narrowed into angry slits as she pulled a luxury pen from her designer handbag and thrust it toward my face, expecting my absolute compliance. I looked from the expensive pen to Barbara's expectant face and felt a slow, steady calm wash over me. The tears that had choked me in the preoperative room were completely gone, replaced by a cold, analytical rage. "I am not signing anything," I said, pushing the folder off my lap so it slid onto the floor, scattering the pristine legal documents across the linoleum tiles. Barbara gasped, stepping back as if I had physically struck her. "You ungrateful little burden," she hissed, her face flushing an angry shade of red. "If you do not sign those papers immediately, I will ensure Brent cancels your health insurance tomorrow. You will be buried in hospital bills you cannot possibly pay, and you will face your oncology treatments completely alone." The threat was vicious and calculated, designed to strike at the absolute core of my vulnerability. But she had miscalculated my strength. I realized in that precise moment that my battle was no longer just against the cancer cells attempting to invade my body. My battle was a fight for sheer survival against my incredibly toxic in-laws. They intended to strip me of my assets, my health care, and my dignity while I was lying defenseless in a hospital bed. "Go ahead and try to cancel my insurance," I challenged her, meeting her furious gaze without flinching. "It is a joint policy tied to my own employment records. You have absolutely no authority here, and neither does your cowardly son. Now get out of my room before I call security and have you escorted from the premises." Barbara gathered her scattered papers with trembling hands, her facade of total control completely shattered by my refusal to submit. She turned on her heel and marched out of the room, leaving me alone with my pain and my newfound resolve. 2 hours after Barbara stormed out, my husband finally decided to make his grand appearance. Brent walked into my recovery room holding a wilted bouquet of cheap supermarket carnations, attempting to arrange his features into an expression of profound suffering. He sat down heavily in the visitor chair, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair and sighing loudly, as if he were the one recovering from major surgery. "Clara, you have no idea how hard this has been for me," he began, immediately playing the victim before I could even speak. "The stress of your diagnosis has completely derailed my focus at work. I have lost sleep, I have lost deals, and I just cannot carry the weight of a sick wife anymore. My mental health has to come first." He placed the sad flowers on my tray table and pulled a fresh envelope from his jacket pocket, dropping it directly onto my lap. It was the official divorce petition. He had actually taken the time to have his mother ambush me for my property equity before serving me the divorce papers, hoping I would be too heavily medicated to realize I was signing away my entire financial safety net. I stared at the man I had loved for years, recognizing him for the first time as a complete stranger. "You abandoned me right before they cut me open," I stated, a matter-of-factly keeping my emotions entirely locked down. "You left me alone to face the terror of surgery because you were too weak to hold my hand." He looked away, unable to meet my eyes, choosing instead to stare at the wall. "We are just not compatible anymore, Clara. It is better we end this quickly without any messy legal battles." I did not get the chance to respond because a wheelchair suddenly rolled past the open doorway and backed smoothly into the room. It was the man from the preoperative ward, the stranger who had offered me the napkin and accepted my ridiculous marriage proposal. He had evidently finished his own minor procedure and was being escorted back to collect his belongings. He sat in the wheelchair dressed in dark trousers and a crisp button-down shirt that commanded immediate respect, even in a clinical setting. He held up a hand, signaling his transport orderly to pause. He watched Brent standing awkwardly by my bed with the divorce papers and the cheap carnations. His dark eyes took in the entire pathetic scene, analyzing the situation with ruthless efficiency. Brent, shifting uncomfortably under the intense scrutiny of this imposing stranger, quickly muttered something about having a corporate conference call and hurried out of the room, leaving the divorce papers resting heavily on my legs. Once Brent was entirely out of sight, the man gestured for his orderly to wheel him closer to my bed. He formally introduced himself as Harrison, extending a steady hand to shake mine. He did not reveal his billionaire status or mention why the nursing staff treated him with such exaggerated reverence. Instead, he reached into his breast pocket and produced a sleek, matte black business card. The card contained only a name and a direct phone number. "That is the contact information for the most ruthless shark attorney in the state," Harrison said, his voice low and incredibly smooth. "You are going to need someone who fights as fiercely as you do. When you call him, tell him Harrison sent you. He will handle the rest." He gave me a brief, reassuring nod before signaling his orderly to continue down the hallway. I sat there, holding the heavy cardstock in my hand, feeling the textured lettering under my thumb. The sheer surreal nature of the encounter made my heart race faster than the pain medication. I looked at the name on the card and realized I had just been handed the ultimate weapon to defend myself. I waited exactly 5 minutes to ensure Brent was truly gone from the hospital premises before picking up my cell phone. My shoulders screamed in agony as I reached across the tray table, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the burning desire for justice fueling my movements. I dialed the number printed on the matte black card. The line rang only once before a crisp, professional voice answered. I cleared my throat, fighting past the dryness left by the breathing tube. "My name is Clara," I said, steadying my tone to convey absolute business-like authority. "I need representation for a highly contentious divorce involving asset protection and financial coercion. I was told to call this number and mention that Harrison sent me." The change on the other end of the line was instantaneous. The attorney's previously polite demeanor transformed into immediate razor-sharp attention. "If Harrison sent you, then you are my top priority client," the attorney replied, his voice dropping into a serious conspiratorial tone. "I am canceling my afternoon appointments. I will have my paralegal bring the intake forms directly to your hospital room within the hour. Do not sign anything your husband gives you, and do not speak to his mother again without my presence. We are locking down your assets immediately." I disconnected the call and let out a long, shaky breath. A genuine smile broke across my face for the first time all day. Brent and his mother thought they had broken me when I was completely vulnerable. They thought they could discard me and steal my life savings without any resistance. They had no idea that their cowardly actions had just unleashed a highly calculated counteroffensive, and I was bringing a billionaire's shark attorney to the fight. 2 days later, the hospital discharged me with a sling supporting my healing shoulder and a strict set of recovery instructions. I took a rideshare back to the suburban house I had spent years meticulously decorating and paying for. When the driver pulled into the driveway, I thanked him and stepped out, bracing myself for the uncomfortable reality of cohabiting with a man who had already served me divorce papers. I keyed my code into the garage keypad, expecting to walk through the utility room and head straight to the guest bedroom to rest. Instead, the heavy metal door rolled up to reveal a wall of thick black contractor trash bags piled haphazardly against the far wall next to the lawnmower. My stomach clenched as I stepped closer. Through the translucent plastic of a torn bag, I recognized the familiar fabric of my favorite winter coat and the customized ergonomic keyboard from my home office setup. Brent had quite literally bagged up my entire existence. The door leading to the kitchen swung open, and Brent stepped into the garage wearing expensive athleisure wear and sipping a protein shake. He did not look like a man agonizing over his impending divorce. He looked completely unbothered. I stared at the mountain of plastic bags and asked him exactly what he thought he was doing. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his shake before answering, his tone dripping with patronizing condescension. "Clara, you have to understand that this environment is just too toxic for my emotional well-being right now. I need the master suite and your home office to create a dedicated mental health sanctuary for myself. Having your sick items and medical supplies everywhere is severely triggering my anxiety. You can take these bags and stay in a hotel until the divorce is finalized." He was actively kicking a recovering cancer patient out of her own home to create a sanctuary. He genuinely expected me to grab my trash bags with one functioning arm and disappear into the ether. I did not scream or cry. I simply looked at the man I had married, registering the absolute void where his conscience should have been. My attorney had warned me he might try to force an illegal eviction, and now he was handing me the exact evidence we needed to destroy him in civil court. I pulled out my phone and began photographing every single trash bag, ensuring the location, metadata, and timestamps were perfectly captured to prove his deliberate cruelty. Before Brent could formulate a demand that I stop taking photographs, a sleek silver sedan pulled abruptly into our driveway, parking at an aggressive angle. The car door slammed shut, and Naomi marched toward the open garage carrying 3 large glass containers of homemade soup. Naomi was married to Brent's older brother, and as a brilliant African-American woman navigating this highly pretentious family, she had always shared a silent understanding with me at their exhausting holiday dinners. She took one look at the towering pile of black trash bags, and then turned her sharp, furious gaze toward Brent. Her perfectly arched eyebrows drew together in a look of absolute disgust that made Brent physically take a step backward. "Are you actually throwing your wife out of her own house 2 days after cancer surgery?" Naomi demanded, her voice ringing with a fierce clarity that echoed off the concrete walls. Brent stammered, attempting to deploy the same ridiculous excuse about his mental health sanctuary, but Naomi cut him off immediately. "Save your pathetic corporate buzzwords for someone who actually believes you're garbage, Brent. We both know you do not need a sanctuary. You just want an empty house so you can freely entertain your junior real estate associate without looking over your shoulder." The words hit the heavy garage air like a physical shockwave. Brent turned an ashen shade of pale, his protein shake slipping slightly in his grip. I stood perfectly still, processing the magnitude of what Naomi had just unleashed. An affair. He was not leaving me because my illness was too stressful. He was leaving me because he had already secured a replacement. Naomi set the heavy containers of soup down on the hood of my car and turned fully toward me, her expression shifting from righteous anger to fierce solidarity. "I am so sorry, Clara," she said, maintaining direct eye contact. "I found out yesterday when his brother had too much to drink and let it slip. Brent has been sleeping with that 24-year-old junior associate for 8 straight months. He has been parading her around the city whenever you were stuck at the oncology clinic getting your biopsies. He told his brother he was waiting for the perfect time to dump you so he could move her into this exact house." Brent sputtered, completely losing his carefully curated composure. He tried to deny it, claiming Naomi was spreading malicious lies to ruin his corporate reputation. He insisted that his relationship with the associate was strictly professional mentorship, but the sheer panic radiating from his entire body confirmed every single syllable Naomi had spoken. He had been meticulously planning this ruthless exit strategy for nearly a year, using my terrifying cancer diagnosis as the ultimate convenient excuse to play the tragic suffering victim while actively betraying our marriage. Brent fully expected me to collapse onto the concrete floor in a puddle of heartbroken tears. He wanted the dramatic, hysterical reaction so he could point at me and justify his narrative of having an unstable, sick wife. Instead, my analytical mind engaged with terrifying precision. The data analyst inside me immediately compartmentalized the emotional betrayal and began structuring a financial timeline. 8 months of active infidelity meant 8 consecutive months of hotel charges, hidden credit card statements, unaccounted business trips, and unexplained cash withdrawals. It meant reviewing restaurant receipts and tracking mileage logs. He had given me the exact time frame I needed to tear his financial records apart piece by piece. I did not shed a single tear. I simply looked at Naomi and nodded, absorbing the vital intelligence she had just handed me on a silver platter. Naomi watched my calculating silence, and a slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across her face. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a heavy brass keyring, dropping it directly into my good hand. "That is the spare key to my guest house across town," Naomi stated loudly, ensuring Brent heard every single word. "The refrigerator is fully stocked, the security system is active, and nobody in this miserable family knows the access code except me. You can stay there as long as you need to recover and figure out your next strategic move. My husband and his mother have driven me completely crazy for the last 5 years, and I absolutely refuse to watch them try to destroy another woman just to protect their precious golden boy." Brent tried to protest, arguing that Naomi had no right to interfere in his private marital disputes, but she completely ignored him. She turned her back on her brother-in-law, treating him as if he were entirely invisible. Together, Naomi and I loaded the most essential trash bags containing my clothes and important documents into the trunk of her car. I left the rest of the bags sitting in the garage, knowing my attorney would use the photographic evidence of this illegal eviction to secure exclusive possession of the property later. We climbed into her sedan, leaving Brent standing alone in his empty garage, holding his protein shake and looking utterly foolish. As Naomi reversed down the driveway, I looked at the brass key resting in my palm. The entire family dynamic had just fractured beyond repair. Brent thought he held all the power because he had the house, the mistress, and the backing of his toxic mother. He had no idea that his sister-in-law had just provided me with a secure base of operations and an unspoken alliance against his entire bloodline. My cancer was being treated, but the real surgery was just beginning. I was going to systematically dissect every lie Brent had ever told, and I was going to use his own 8-month timeline of infidelity to ensure he lost absolutely everything. The guest house Naomi provided was impeccably clean and blessedly quiet, a sharp contrast to the chaotic garage I had just left behind. I sat at the small glass dining table wincing as my healing shoulder throbbed against the restrictive fabric of my surgical sling. My immediate priority was securing my medical continuity and ensuring my treatments would not be interrupted. The hospital portal on my laptop displayed an outstanding surgical copay that needed to be cleared before I could officially schedule my mandatory follow-up oncology appointments. I pulled up our joint banking dashboard, the primary account where I had faithfully deposited every single paycheck performance bonus and stock dividend for the past 4 years. I expected to see the comfortable cushion of $75,000 we had meticulously saved for our future investments and emergency expenses. Instead, the bold black numbers on the high-resolution screen registered a balance of exactly $0.00. A sudden wave of icy adrenaline washed over me, completely replacing the lingering fatigue of my operation. I hit refresh on my web browser repeatedly, desperately convincing myself it was a mere glitch in the banking server. The screen blinked and reloaded, still displaying that devastating absolute zero. Brent had not merely moved a few $1,000s to cover his immediate living expenses, he had systematically drained our entire joint savings account, leaving me completely destitute in the critical aftermath of cancer surgery. This was not a panicked reaction to our sudden separation or a simple misunderstanding over shared finances. It was a highly calculated financial execution. He knew I desperately needed those funds to pay for my ongoing cancer treatments, and he intentionally stripped me of my ability to survive. He wanted me desperate, begging, and entirely dependent on his non-existent mercy. I clicked through the detailed transaction history, my eyes frantically scanning the digital ledger. 2 days before my surgery, while he was supposedly holding my hand and comforting me through my terrifying diagnosis, he had executed a massive wire transfer routing the entire $75,000 to an external account I did not recognize. He had looked me directly in the eyes, promising we would fight the disease together, all while secretly gutting my financial safety net. The sheer sociopathic nature of his deception solidified my fierce resolve. Any lingering trace of the woman who had loved him vanished entirely in that moment. He intended to bleed me dry and leave me to face my medical crisis with absolutely nothing. He assumed my physical vulnerability meant I was mentally incapacitated. He was completely wrong. I pushed the agonizing pain in my shoulder aside and fully activated the advanced data analyst training that had made me one of the top earners at my firm. Brent possessed the cunning of a cheating husband, but he severely lacked the technical sophistication required to hide digital footprints from a professional auditor. He assumed his corporate title made him superior, but his digital hygiene was absolutely atrocious. I opened my specialized analytics software and began running complex trace programs on the external routing numbers listed in our depleted bank statements. He had attempted to obscure the destination by funneling the money through 2 intermediary digital payment platforms, but his execution was remarkably amateurish and sloppy. Within 45 minutes, I successfully bypassed his digital smokescreen and traced the primary wire transfer to a corporate holding account. I ran the tax identification number associated with that specific account through a public business registry, and the result made my blood run completely cold. The account belonged to Pinnacle Heights Management, an exclusive property firm solely dealing in high-end downtown real estate. I cross-referenced the transaction dates with the exact 8-month timeline Naomi had provided regarding his affair with the junior associate. The data points locked together with devastating precision. Brent had not hidden the money in a secure offshore account or a secret investment portfolio. He had used my hard-earned salary and my agonizingly accumulated savings to sign a premium 12-month lease on a luxury downtown condominium for his 24-year-old mistress. He funded their lavish secret life using the very money I had saved by skipping vacations and working grueling 60-hour weeks. I found additional recurring charges for high-end designer boutiques, exclusive champagne deliveries, and luxury car valet services, all tied directly to that penthouse address. He was pouring my life savings into creating a superficial paradise for a woman who barely knew how to balance a basic spreadsheet. The sheer audacity of his spending habits fueled my intense focus, sharpening my mind into a lethal weapon. I dug deeper, accessing our shared cellular provider dashboard to pull the geolocation metadata from his recent network logins. The digital breadcrumbs led directly to the exact building coordinates. I took high-resolution screenshots of every single bank transfer, every Internet Protocol address login, and every geolocation tag, compiling an airtight digital dossier of his financial infidelity. He was actively committing marital asset dissipation, a massive legal violation that family court judges absolutely despised. He had no idea he had left a glowing neon trail of evidence pointing directly to his massive financial fraud. I saved the encrypted files to 3 separate secure cloud drives, ensuring the data was permanently preserved. He wanted to play a high-stakes game of financial sabotage using my money. I was about to show him exactly what happened when you challenge a senior data analyst to a numbers game. My phone vibrated violently against the glass table, interrupting my intense data collection. It was an automated alert from my credit card company, informing me that a purchase for a minor grocery delivery had been outright declined. I immediately logged into the credit portal to investigate the unexpected error. Brent had escalated his vicious attack. Using his status as the primary account holder, he had frozen every single shared credit card in my possession. He was systematically attempting to starve me out, ensuring I could not buy healthy food, pay for safe transportation, or purchase my highly required post-operative medications. He wanted to force me into a position of absolute submission, crawling back to him to beg for basic human necessities. Instead of panicking, I reached into my bag and pulled out the matte black business card Harrison had handed me in the hospital recovery room. I dialed the direct number, and the shark attorney answered immediately. I clearly explained the drained bank accounts, the traced luxury condominium lease, and the recently frozen credit cards. The attorney's voice on the other end of the line carried a lethal professional calm that instantly reassured me. He instructed me to meet him at his downtown office immediately, utilizing a private corporate car service he dispatched directly to Naomi's guest house. When I arrived at the sleek mahogany-paneled law firm, I handed him the encrypted drive containing my comprehensive financial trace. The attorney reviewed the raw data with a sharp, predatory smile, noting that my pristine documentation saved his team weeks of tedious discovery work. He immediately drafted an emergency ex parte motion for a strict financial injunction. Because Brent had flagrantly dissipated marital assets to fund an extramarital affair while actively interfering with my critical medical care, the presiding judge did not hesitate to act. Within 2 hours, the court granted a sweeping emergency order that completely froze Brent's personal bank accounts, his diverse investment portfolios, and his lucrative corporate expense accounts. The legal strike was swift, devastating, and entirely invisible to him until it was far too late. He had tried to cut off my access to $50 for basic groceries and medical supplies. In swift retaliation, my elite attorney had just legally paralyzed his entire financial existence. The injunction meant Brent could not pay the upcoming rent on his mistress's luxury condo He could not access his daily funds for his lavish lifestyle, and he was legally bound from moving any remaining assets out of the state. The legal trap had officially snapped shut around his wallet, leaving him completely financially immobilized while I sat comfortably in the attorney's office, drinking premium coffee and planning my next strategic maneuver. Brent did not wait long to attempt a counterattack. The very next morning, I was sitting on the patio of Naomi's guest house reviewing my medical charts when a sleek black SUV aggressively jumped the curb and parked on the pristine grass. Brent stepped out, slamming the heavy door with enough force to rattle the windows. He had somehow bullied the address out of his brother, and he marched up the walkway looking like a man who believed he owned the entire world. He was wearing his custom-tailored Italian suit, the one he specifically reserved for high-stakes corporate negotiations. Instead of showing any remorse or even acknowledging the absolute financial devastation he had tried to inflict upon me, he crossed his arms and sneered. He assumed my attorney was doing pro bono work for a desperate sick woman. He leaned against the patio railing and laughed a cold, arrogant sound that grated against my nerves. He told me I was wasting my time fighting him because his career was about to reach an untouchable pinnacle. He bragged loudly about a massive impending corporate merger that his regional division was spearheading. He claimed this monumental deal would guarantee his promotion to senior vice president, ensuring he would have the corporate backing and the unlimited financial resources to crush me in family court. He mocked my legal representation, calling them pathetic charity lawyers who would easily fold the second his corporate legal team flexed their muscles. He actually smiled as he told me that his company was being acquired by the Thorne conglomerate, a legendary real estate empire that devoured smaller firms and rewarded ruthless executives like him. He promised me that once the merger was finalized, his new executive salary and signing bonuses would make my frozen bank accounts look like absolute pocket change. He threatened to drag out our divorce until I was completely bankrupt and begging him for a settlement. I simply sipped my herbal tea and watched him perform his pathetic display of corporate bravado. I did not bother telling him that my charity lawyer charged $1,000 an hour, or that the emergency injunction was already slowly choking his daily cash flow. I just let him talk, memorizing every single detail he arrogantly revealed about his precious corporate merger, knowing his massive ego was handing me the exact ammunition I needed to completely destroy his professional life. Leaving Brent to stew in his own inflated arrogance, I ordered a private car and headed straight to an upscale cafe in the financial district. I had arranged to meet the mystery man from the hospital to formally express my immense gratitude for connecting me with the attorney who had literally saved my financial life. Harrison was already seated at a secluded corner table when I walked through the heavy glass doors. He wore a sharp charcoal suit perfectly tailored to his broad shoulders, radiating that same quiet, commanding authority that had instantly calmed my severe panic attack just days prior. He stood up politely as I approached, pulling out my chair and ordering me a premium herbal tea without even needing to ask my preference. I thanked him profusely for the legal referral, explaining how swiftly and ruthlessly the attorney had moved to freeze my cheating husband out of his own illicitly funded accounts. Harrison simply smiled, a genuine warm expression that entirely transformed his sharp features. He brushed off my gratitude, stating that men who abandon their sick wives deserve absolutely zero mercy. As we drank our coffee, the conversation naturally shifted toward my professional background. I explained my extensive work as a senior data analyst, detailing how I had successfully tracked the hidden digital footprints of my husband's financial infidelity. I casually mentioned Brent's name and the specific regional real estate firm he worked for, noting his arrogant boasting from that very morning. I told Harrison about the massive upcoming corporate merger Brent was relying on to elevate him to an untouchable executive status. I even mentioned the name of the acquiring company, the Thorne conglomerate, rolling my eyes at how Brent idolized their ruthless corporate culture. Harrison slowly set his ceramic coffee cup down on the polished wooden table. He leaned back in his chair and a highly amused, completely predatory smile spread across his face. He reached into his tailored jacket and produced another business card, but this one was vastly different from the blank black card he had given me in the hospital recovery room. This card was thick embossed ivory paper featuring the unmistakable gold crest of the Thorn conglomerate. He slid the heavy card across the table right into my hand. My eyes scanned the elegant printed text, and my breath hitched in my throat. The card read, Harrison Thorn, Chief Executive Officer and Majority Shareholder. The man who had calmly talked me down from a panic attack, the man to whom I had jokingly proposed marriage behind a hospital privacy curtain, was the absolute supreme commander of the massive billionaire empire Brent worshipped. He was the overarching boss of the very company acquiring Brent's firm. Harrison watched my stunned realization with intense satisfaction. He casually explained that he had been in that specific hospital wing, under an alias, for a minor elective procedure, completely incognito to avoid any corporate media attention. He had witnessed Brent's cowardly behavior and recognized his name from the acquisition files. My cheating narcissistic husband was actively trying to impress the very billionaire who had just handed me the legal weapons to completely destroy him. The sheer magnitude of the coincidence left me entirely speechless, but Harrison did not give me much time to sit in stunned silence. His amused smile faded, shifting seamlessly into a look of absolute serious corporate calculation. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and locked his dark, intense eyes onto mine. He told me that his acquisition team had been reviewing the financial ledgers of Brent's regional real estate division for the past 3 weeks. While the surface-level numbers looked promising, Harrison's finely tuned business instincts were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong with their books. His internal auditors had flagged several highly suspicious expense accounts and questionable property valuation metrics, but they lacked the specific localized knowledge to pierce the division's creative accounting practices. He needed a brilliant, fiercely motivated, and entirely uncompromised data analyst to secretly infiltrate the regional ledgers and tear their financial records wide open. He needed someone who knew how these specific men thought, how they hid their money, and how they covered their digital tracks. He looked directly at me and offered me the position right there in the middle of the crowded cafe. He wanted to hire me as an independent shadow auditor, reporting exclusively and directly to him. I would have unrestricted top-tier clearance to access every single financial database, expense report, and corporate holding account within Brent's entire regional division. Harrison promised me a staggering consulting fee that would comfortably cover all my remaining medical bills and future living expenses, but we both knew the money was entirely secondary to the real prize. He was handing me the master key to Brent's professional kingdom and essentially granting me full permission to burn his career to the ground if I found proof of his corporate misconduct. He saw the fierce, unyielding determination burning in my eyes and knew he had found the perfect weapon for his corporate audit. I did not need to think about his offer. The data analyst inside me was already mentally compiling the algorithms and search parameters I would use to dissect Brent's expense reports. I reached across the polished table and firmly shook Harrison's hand, officially accepting his unbelievable offer. A powerful, silent agreement was forged between us in that exact moment. Brent believed he was a rising corporate star, manipulating his sick wife and impressing his billionaire bosses while suffering zero consequences for his absolute cruelty. He had no idea that his wife had just partnered with the apex predator of his corporate food chain. I walked out of that cafe with a highly lucrative contract, a direct line to a billionaire chief executive, and an arsenal of digital tools at my disposal. The trap was officially set, and I was going to use my husband's boundless arrogance to spring it directly on his neck. I returned to Naomi's guest house and immediately booted up my customized workstation, ready to initiate the shadow audit Harrison had authorized. Before diving into the encrypted corporate servers, I opened my professional networking dashboard to verify Brent's current employment status and recent public activities. My screen instantly flooded with notifications pointing to a massively trending article. Brent had published a lengthy, highly stylized essay that was rapidly going viral across the entire corporate network. The headline made my stomach violently churn. He titled it, "The Silent Agony of Leadership Balancing Corporate Excellence While Supporting a Spouse Through Cancer." I read through the sickeningly fabricated paragraphs with absolute disgust. He painted himself as a tragic, heroic figure enduring sleepless nights sitting by my hospital bed while simultaneously closing multi-million-dollar real estate deals. He blatantly lied about holding my hand through terrifying oncology appointments, claiming his unwavering dedication to his family was the true secret behind his professional resilience. He described fictional conversations where I supposedly begged him to maintain his career focus, and he valiantly refused to let his division falter. The sheer magnitude of his public gaslighting was breathtaking. Every single word was a calculated stepping stone toward the executive suite he so desperately craved. He strategically tagged the senior leadership team of his regional division and heavily utilized corporate buzzwords designed to catch the attention of the Thorn conglomerate executives. It was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation entirely engineered to leverage my life-threatening illness to secure his coveted promotion to vice president before the impending merger. The metrics on the post were staggering. He had accumulated tens of thousands of impressions, thousands of likes, and hundreds of comments from powerful industry leaders, praising his profound strength and emotional intelligence. My husband had literally abandoned me via a cowardly text message just 38 minutes before my surgeon cut into my skin, yet he was now publicly soaking up the adoration of the entire business community for being an absolute saint. My analytical mind quickly calculated the strategic implications of his massive public relations stunt. He was actively cementing a pristine corporate image, tying his professional reliability directly to his supposed moral character as a devoted husband. He had no idea that by building this massive public pedestal, he was simply increasing the height from which he was about to fall. I picked up my cell phone and dialed his private number, refusing to let this blatant public manipulation go unchallenged. Brent answered on the second ring, his voice carrying a smug, self-satisfied tone that indicated he was currently basking in his viral fame. I demanded that he immediately remove the fabricated essay from his professional profile, outlining exactly how despicable it was to use my medical trauma for corporate clout. Brent merely let out a low, patronizing laugh that echoed through the phone speaker. He immediately launched into a highly aggressive gaslighting campaign, twisting the narrative with breathtaking ease. He claimed he was actually doing me a massive favor by publishing the article. He stated that securing the vice president promotion was essential for finalizing our divorce settlement, arguing that a higher executive salary meant I would walk away with a larger alimony payout. He actively tried to convince me that leveraging my cancer diagnosis was a brilliant strategic business move that benefited us both. He then dropped the facade of the concerned provider and shifted directly into issuing sharp, calculated threats. He explicitly warned me not to comment on the post, contradict his timeline, or do anything to sabotage his meticulously crafted public image. He promised that if I embarrassed him during this critical acquisition phase, or jeopardized his impending promotion, he would instruct his legal team to completely destroy my reputation in family court. He threatened to use the grueling nature of my oncology treatments against me, claiming he would convince a judge that the cancer medications had rendered me mentally unstable and entirely delusional. He ordered me to stay quiet, remain in the shadows, and let him handle the public narrative while he secured his corporate crown. I did not raise my voice or react to his vicious intimidation tactics. I simply absorbed his threats, memorizing his exact phrasing and recognizing that his desperation for corporate validation had made him incredibly reckless. His arrogance blinded him to the reality of the situation. He genuinely believed his manipulative tactics were flawless and that his threats would keep me entirely paralyzed with fear. He thought he was playing chess while I was playing checkers, completely unaware that I had already flipped the entire board. I disconnected the call in complete silence, allowing him to believe he had successfully bullied me into submission. The moment I ended the call, my phone chimed with a rapid succession of encrypted message alerts. Naomi had been conducting her own fierce reconnaissance operation while I was busy dealing with Brent. She forwarded me a massive batch of high-resolution screenshots capturing the comment section of Brent's viral essay. While Brent had been carefully managing the responses from his corporate superiors, he had severely underestimated the arrogance of his 24-year-old mistress. Operating under a thinly veiled private account, the junior real estate associate had been leaving an entire trail of overly affectionate and highly possessive comments directly on his public post. She wrote cloying messages praising his unparalleled strength, calling him her ultimate inspiration, and stating that only the people closest to him truly understood the massive sacrifices he was making behind closed doors. Brent, high on the validation of his viral fame, had been recklessly engaging with her comments. He had publicly replied with heart emojis and inside jokes, entirely oblivious to how transparent their digital interactions truly were. Naomi pointed out the specific timestamps on the screenshots overlaying them with the exact dates I had been lying alone in my hospital bed, recovering from major surgery. The mistress was actively marking her territory right under the noses of his professional network, and Brent was foolishly encouraging it. I immediately downloaded the entire batch of screenshots, adding them directly to the secure audit file I was building for Harrison. The digital paper trail of his profound hypocrisy was expanding at an exponential rate. He was publicly claiming to be a devoted husband while digitally flirting with his subordinate on a professional networking platform, tying his personal infidelity directly to his corporate identity. His attempt to build an untouchable public persona was rapidly becoming the very evidence that would guarantee his absolute destruction. I organized the data points linking the timestamps of his romantic social media interactions with the dates of the illicit corporate funds he had funneled to pay for her luxury downtown condominium. Brent had essentially handed me a fully documented map of his personal and professional betrayals. The concerned husband's facade was nothing more than a fragile house of cards, and I was methodically preparing to pull the foundation right out from under him. The very next morning, a courier arrived at the guest house demanding a signature for a thick, certified envelope. I opened it to find a formal cease and desist notice drafted by the cheap, aggressive attorney Brent had hired. The document was a masterpiece of intimidation and legal absurdity. It centered entirely around the upcoming annual charity gala hosted by Brent's regional real estate firm. This gala was the absolute crown jewel of their corporate calendar, a massive high-stakes networking event specifically designed this year to celebrate the impending merger with the Thorne conglomerate. The legal notice explicitly banned me from attending the event, claiming my presence would constitute a deliberate attempt to inflict emotional distress upon my husband. The attorney had the sheer audacity to state that due to my recent cancer surgery and ongoing recovery, I was deemed medically unfit to attend a public function of this magnitude. Brent was actively weaponizing my physical health to legally bar me from showing my face. The notice claimed that a sickly recovering spouse would create an uncomfortable environment for the executives and severely embarrass Brent in front of his corporate superiors. He wanted to ensure that the tragic narrative he had spun on his viral social media post remained completely unchallenged by the inconvenient reality of my actual existence. He believed that by putting this ridiculous demand on official legal letterhead, he could paralyze me with the threat of legal retaliation. My analytical mind quickly disassembled his strategy. The letter possessed zero actual legal authority to prevent me from attending a public charity event, but it perfectly highlighted his absolute terror. Brent was petrified that I would show up and shatter the flawless devoted husband illusion he had constructed for his billionaire bosses. He was attempting to build an impenetrable fortress around his social standing using aggressive legal threats as his primary defense mechanism. I placed the useless document on my desk, analyzing his extreme desperation. He was trying to erase me from the public eye, entirely locking me away in the shadows, while he secured his promotion. Less than 2 hours after the courier departed, Naomi unlocked the front door of the guest house and marched inside, clutching her designer handbag with fierce intensity. She dropped the bag onto the kitchen island and immediately unleashed a torrent of explosive intelligence she had just gathered from the inner family circle. Brent was not simply planning to attend the prestigious gala as a solo tragic figure bravely smiling through the pain of his wife's medical crisis. The reality was far more twisted and infinitely more arrogant. Naomi informed me that Brent was officially bringing his 24-year-old junior associate to the gala as his registered plus one. But his delusion did not stop at simply parading his mistress around his colleagues. Naomi revealed that Brent had actively convinced his mother and his brother that he was going to boldly introduce this young associate to the overarching CEO Harrison Thorne as his brand new fiancé. He had constructed an elaborate lie claiming that he and I had been amicably separated for over a year, and that this junior associate had been his absolute rock during my unfortunate illness. Naomi expressed pure revulsion as she described how Barbara was currently helping Brent shop for an engagement ring to solidify this horrific illusion. Brent genuinely believed that arriving at the most important corporate event of his life with a vibrant, healthy, and obedient young partner on his arm would project the exact image of dynamic masculine leadership that the Thorne conglomerate desired in their future vice presidents. I sat completely still, processing the sheer magnitude of his fatal miscalculation. He was not just attempting to replace me. He was planning to publicly flaunt the very woman he had been funding with embezzled corporate money directly in front of the supreme commander of the acquiring empire. He was planning to look Harrison Thorne directly in the eyes and introduce his fraud accomplice as his future wife. The absolute vanity required to execute such a brazen stunt was staggering. He was willingly walking into a room filled with industry titans, carrying the physical proof of his marital and financial betrayal right on his arm. Brent had practically gift-wrapped his own professional execution. I looked at Naomi and let out a sharp, humorless laugh, outlining exactly how perfectly his arrogance was playing directly into our hands. He thought he was staging his ultimate corporate coronation, but he was actually setting the stage for his absolute destruction. I immediately pulled out my phone and drafted a highly secure text message to the direct number Harrison had provided. I kept the communication entirely professional and surgically precise, outlining Brent's explicit intention to attend the charity gala with his mistress and his delusional plan to introduce her to the chief executive as his new fiancée. I hit send and began compiling the next phase of my digital audit. I expected a brief reply, or perhaps a quick phone call from his legal team to adjust our strategy. Instead, exactly 45 minutes later, a sleek black town car glided silently into the driveway of the guest house. The heavy car door opened, and Harrison Thorne himself stepped out onto the pavement. He did not send a corporate courier or delegate the task to an assistant. The billionaire overarching CEO walked directly to my front door, carrying a thick, matte black envelope. When I opened the door, he handed the envelope to me with a predatory smile that perfectly matched my own cold resolve. Inside rested a heavy, engraved metal card, a platinum, all-access VIP invitation to the charity gala. This was not a standard entry ticket. It was an executive pass that granted me unrestricted access to the highest tiers of the event, including the heavily guarded velvet-roped tables reserved exclusively for the senior leadership of the Thorne conglomerate. Harrison looked me directly in the eyes and expressed his absolute anticipation for the upcoming evening, fully endorsing my plan to crash Brent's perfect party. He confirmed that my shadow audit was uncovering massive irregularities, and the gala would serve as the ultimate execution ground for his corporate cleansing. I accepted the platinum invitation, feeling the cold weight of the metal against my palm. As Harrison returned to his waiting car, I turned back to my workstation and immediately began planning my entrance. I would not arrive looking like the frail, discarded, and medically unfit liability Brent had described in his pathetic legal notice. I would arrive as the undeniable architect of his total annihilation. I closed the heavy front door and immediately carried the platinum VIP invitation to my workstation. Setting the engraved metal carefully next to my monitor, I cracked my knuckles and officially initiated the shadow audit. Harrison had provided me with a secure encrypted portal, granting me God-tier administrative access to the entire regional corporate network. To prevent Brent or his IT department from flagging my presence, I operated entirely under a newly registered shell corporation named Apex Analytics LLC. The digital disguise allowed me to move invisibly through their localized servers like a ghost in the machine. I started by isolating the specific department Brent managed, focusing my search parameters strictly on the executive expense reports and discretionary spending accounts approved over the last 12 months. The initial surface data looked perfectly normal, exactly as Harrison had warned me. The ledgers were balanced, the profit margins appeared robust, and the operational costs fell well within standard industry metrics. But I was not looking at the surface. I deployed a series of custom automated scripts I had coded myself, designed to hunt for duplicate invoice numbers, overlapping vendor identification codes, and unusual authorization patterns. I cross-referenced the raw corporate data with the specific timelines and routing numbers I had already extracted from Brent's personal financial sabotage of our joint savings. My eyes darted across the glowing lines of code, parsing through thousands of transactions with surgical precision. It did not take long for the flawless corporate facade to crack. The regional accounting team had built firewalls to keep out casual observers, but their internal tracking methods were incredibly sloppy when viewed by a senior data analyst. I bypassed their basic security protocols and entered the restricted executive ledger. The numbers began to tell a story that went far beyond simple infidelity or marital asset dissipation. Brent had been manipulating the corporate accounts with the exact same arrogant recklessness he had used to destroy our marriage. I sat forward in my chair, my shoulder pain completely forgotten, as the massive scale of his professional deception materialized on my dual monitors. The deeper I dug into the restricted executive ledgers, the more staggering the financial discrepancies became. I specifically targeted the wire transfers routed to Pinnacle Heights Management, the exclusive property firm managing the downtown luxury condominium where his 24-year-old junior associate currently resided. I had previously proven that Brent drained my personal savings to secure the initial premium 12-month lease. However, securing the lease was merely the beginning of his massive financial fraud. Maintaining that extravagant penthouse lifestyle required a continuous flow of capital that vastly exceeded his standard regional director salary. I pulled the detailed expense authorizations and discovered exactly how he was bridging the financial gap. Brent had not just been cheating on me, he had been actively embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars directly from the regional corporate treasury. I uncovered a highly coordinated scheme where he had officially reclassified the mistress's luxury downtown condominium as a dedicated regional corporate retreat facility. He had fraudulently designated the penthouse as a vital asset for entertaining high-value real estate clients and hosting private executive strategy sessions. Using this completely fabricated classification, he was systematically funneling massive amounts of corporate capital to cover the monthly maintenance fees, premium utility costs, and extravagant interior design upgrades. But his audacity did not stop at simply subsidizing her rent. I ran a secondary trace on the vendor payouts associated with the property and discovered a shell vendor account registered directly under the junior associate's name. Brent had officially listed his mistress as the designated property manager for this fictitious corporate retreat. He was authorizing monthly corporate dividend payouts to her account, effectively using company funds to pay her a lavish secondary salary solely for being his secret girlfriend. I found categorized expenditures for client entertainment that perfectly matched the dates of their romantic weekend getaways. He had approved invoices for office supplies that were actually routed to high-end jewelers. The junior associate was not just receiving a fake salary, she was submitting fraudulent expense reports for luxury spa days and claiming them as corporate wellness retreats. He had forged the signatures of 2 different regional compliance officers to bypass the standard budgetary reviews, assuming the upcoming merger would bury the paperwork forever in the transitional chaos. He had intentionally merged his personal marital betrayal with massive federal corporate fraud. Every expensive dinner, every designer handbag, and every bottle of premium champagne he bought to impress her was funded by stolen corporate capital. He was completely convinced of his own untouchable brilliance, while unknowingly handing me the exact legal leverage required to send him directly to a federal penitentiary. I spent the next 6 hours meticulously compiling every single piece of evidence into an airtight, undeniable digital dossier. I did not just print out spreadsheets, I constructed a comprehensive financial narrative. I created high-definition data visualization charts that perfectly correlated the stolen corporate funds with the exact timeline of his infidelity and his illegal draining of our marital assets. I linked every forged authorization signature to the corresponding fraudulent wire transfers, mapping out the entire embezzlement ring with absolute mathematical certainty. The final report left zero room for interpretation, zero plausible deniability, and zero chance for Brent to negotiate his way out of the impending destruction. I transferred the entire explosive package onto a highly secure encrypted solid-state drive. I locked the files behind a multi-layered biometric encryption protocol, ensuring the data remained entirely uncompromised. Once the digital weapon was fully primed, I sent a brief secure message to Harrison requesting an immediate in-person handover. We arranged to meet at a discreet private lounge located on the top floor of a downtown high-rise, far away from any regional corporate spies. When I arrived, Harrison was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. I walked directly up to him and placed the heavy encrypted drive firmly into his waiting hand. I gave him the decryption keys and verbally summarized the staggering extent of Brent's corporate embezzlement, including the fabricated corporate retreat facility and the fraudulent salary payments to the junior associate. Harrison did not show shock. He showed the cold, calculated satisfaction of an apex predator who had just been handed the perfect trap. He promised that his legal team and the corporate board would review every single line of code before the gala. He assured me that Brent would face the full, merciless weight of the corporate legal division. He looked down at the drive and then looked directly at me, his eyes blazing with intense professional respect. As I turned to leave the private lounge, Harrison called out, reminding me to prepare my wardrobe for the upcoming charity gala. The corporate dig was officially complete and the stage was perfectly set. The very next morning, my cell phone buzzed with an incoming message from an unknown number. The text claimed to be from a highly recommended private mediator, suggesting a neutral sit-down at a popular downtown cafe to amicably resolve the escalating asset dispute before our respective attorneys drained the remaining marital funds. The language was meticulously polite, heavily emphasizing collaboration and healing. My analytical instincts immediately flagged the sudden shift in tone. Brent and his mother had operated exclusively on aggression and intimidation for the past 3 weeks. They did not understand the concept of amicable resolution unless they were the ones completely dictating the terms. I ran a quick background check on the provided phone number and discovered it was registered to a burner account purchased just 2 days prior. Barbara was attempting a tactical maneuver, assuming I was still the naive, accommodating wife she could easily manipulate. I decided to accept the invitation, not because I believed her pathetic ruse, but because I needed to personally assess their current level of desperation. When I arrived at the busy cafe, I spotted the ambush instantly. There was no professional mediator waiting at the reserved corner table. Instead, Barbara sat rigidly in her designer suit, flanked by Brent and a sleazy-looking man I immediately recognized as the cheap, aggressive attorney who had drafted the laughable cease and desist notice. They had strategically positioned themselves to physically block my exit if I sat down, hoping the public setting would prevent me from creating a scene. Brent looked uncharacteristically nervous, his usual corporate arrogance slightly dampened by the devastating reality of the emergency financial injunction slowly strangling his accounts. He actually attempted to order my favorite latte as a patronizing olive branch. I ignored his pathetic gesture entirely, pulling out a chair and sitting directly across from the discount lawyer. I placed my phone face down on the table, ensuring the recording application was actively capturing every single syllable of their impending extortion attempt. I stared at Barbara, waiting for her to launch her prepared assault, fully aware that her desperation was about to hand me the final nail for her son's coffin. The discount lawyer did not waste time with pleasantries. He aggressively slid a thick, poorly formatted legal document across the table, tapping his pen against the signature line with excessive force. He launched into a rapid-fire monologue designed to overwhelm and intimidate. He claimed that the emergency financial injunction I had secured was a massive overreach, and that Brent was prepared to drag the divorce proceedings out for years, bankrupting me entirely in the process. He presented the document as a generous final offer. The settlement demanded I sign over 90% of our total marital assets, including my full equity in the house, and complete access to my remaining retirement accounts. In exchange, Brent would graciously agree to an uncontested divorce and drop his absolutely baseless claims against me. When I stared at the ridiculous proposal without flinching, Barbara eagerly leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with malice. She decided it was time to deploy their ultimate weapon. If you refuse this incredibly generous offer, Clara, we will have no choice but to protect Brent's interests in open court, she threatened, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. My son's legal team is fully prepared to subpoena your entire oncology file. We will bring in expert witnesses to testify that your grueling cancer treatments and heavy medications have rendered you completely mentally unstable and entirely unfit to manage your own finances. We will paint you as a delusional, hysterical woman who fabricated an affair just to punish her devoted, successful husband. They were actively attempting to weaponize my cancer diagnosis, to coerce me into signing away my life savings. They genuinely believed that the threat of public humiliation and the invasion of my deeply personal medical privacy would break my spirit. Brent nodded solemnly beside his mother, attempting to project an image of profound sorrow while actively participating in the extortion. They expected me to crumble, to cry, or to beg for mercy. They had no idea that I had spent the entire night building the digital guillotine that was about to sever his corporate career. I looked at the settlement document resting on the table, taking in the sheer audacity of their demands. I looked at Brent, recognizing the absolute cowardice hiding behind his tailored suit and his mother's vicious threats. I thought about the massive encrypted dossier currently sitting in Harrison's secure corporate vault, detailing every single fraudulent wire transfer and forged authorization Brent had executed. I knew with absolute mathematical certainty that Brent was not going to be a rising corporate star dragged down by a sick wife. Within 48 hours, he was going to be a publicly disgraced, unemployed criminal facing severe federal embezzlement charges. His empty threats about dragging my medical history through family court were entirely meaningless because he was about to lose the financial capacity to hire a decent defense attorney, let alone fund a prolonged civil litigation. I did not raise my voice or attempt to argue with their ridiculous ultimatum. I simply reached across the table and pushed the unsigned settlement papers directly back toward the discount lawyer. I offered them a slow, chilling smile that completely unnerved both Brent and his mother. I stood up from the table, smoothing my coat with complete composure. I informed them that they should hold on to those settlement papers because Brent was going to need every single cent he could scrounge together to cover his impending legal defense fees. Before they could process my cryptic statement, I signaled the waitress for my check. Instead of using my personal debit card, I pulled out the sleek, heavy black corporate card Harrison's firm had provided to cover my independent audit expenses. The distinctive Thorn conglomerate logo caught the light perfectly as I handed it to the waitress. Brent's eyes widened in absolute shock, recognizing the exclusive corporate insignia of the very empire he was desperately trying to impress. His jaw dropped as he tried to comprehend how his supposedly destitute, mentally unstable wife possessed a top-tier executive card from his acquiring company. I did not offer a single word of explanation. I signed the receipt, thanked the waitress, and walked out of the cafe, leaving the three of them sitting in stunned, panicked silence. The ambush had failed spectacularly, and I was heading home to prepare for the gala. However, before I could officially finalize my wardrobe for the impending corporate execution, I had a mandatory post-operative evaluation to attend the following afternoon. The crisp air outside the oncology clinic felt incredibly refreshing after the stifling atmosphere of the medical building. I had just finished my surgical follow-up, and the doctor was highly optimistic about my healing progress. As I walked toward the rideshare pickup zone, clutching my pristine medical clearance paperwork, I heard the sharp, aggressive clicking of high heels rapidly approaching from behind. I turned around expecting to see a rushing nurse, but instead found myself face to face with Brent's 24-year-old junior real estate associate. His mistress stood blocking my path to the curb, wearing a smug expression and carrying a designer handbag that I knew for an absolute mathematical fact had been purchased using stolen corporate capital. She looked me up and down with blatant disgust, clearly evaluating my comfortable recovery clothes and surgical sling against her own heavily curated professional attire. Brent had undoubtedly filled her head with pathetic stories about my supposed mental instability and physical fragility, because she approached me not with caution, but with the staggering overconfidence of a woman who believed she had already won the war. She crossed her arms, positioning herself between me and the approaching vehicles demanding my immediate attention. She did not bother to introduce herself, assuming her mere presence was enough to intimidate me into submission. Instead, she launched directly into a fierce, unhinged monologue, entirely fueled by the narcissistic lies Brent had been feeding her for the past 8 months. She arrogantly informed me that she was exhausted from waiting in the shadows while Brent constantly dealt with my endless dramatic medical episodes. She claimed that my refusal to quietly sign the settlement papers at the cafe was incredibly selfish, and that I was actively ruining the life of a brilliant man who had already moved on. I simply stood there watching this deeply misguided young woman aggressively champion a man who was actively setting her up as the primary fall guy for a massive federal embezzlement scheme. "You need to stop being a pathetic parasite and just sign the divorce papers," she demanded, her voice rising shrilly enough to catch the attention of several passing pedestrians. "Brent is destined for the executive suite, and you are nothing but a massive anchor dragging down his entire career trajectory." She stepped closer, jabbing a perfectly manicured finger into the empty space between us. "He told me exactly how you tried to extort him at the mediation meeting yesterday, but your little stunt completely failed. We are moving forward with the merger promotion regardless of your hysterical threats." I maintained my absolute silence, allowing her arrogant momentum to push her right over the edge of rational thought. My lack of an emotional reaction deeply unsettled her, causing her to double down on her vicious rhetoric. She desperately wanted to hurt me, to prove her absolute superiority in this twisted love triangle, so she recklessly deployed what she believed was her ultimate weapon. "You think freezing his personal bank accounts was some kind of brilliant masterstroke?" She sneered, laughing mockingly right in my face. "You are a completely delusional, Clara. Brent is 10 steps ahead of your discount lawyers. He does not even need his personal savings to take care of me. He already guaranteed my lifestyle by routing my luxury penthouse lease and my monthly allowance directly through the regional corporate retreat budget." She boasted that she was officially listed as the property manager for the fictitious retreat facility, meaning she was drawing a massive secondary salary funded entirely by the company. "He controls the entire vendor payout system, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop him from taking care of his actual future wife." The sheer magnitude of her stupidity left me momentarily breathless. In her desperate attempt to prove her financial dominance, she had just openly and loudly confessed to having full, explicit knowledge of a massive corporate embezzlement operation. She had proudly admitted to willingly receiving stolen corporate capital and actively participating in vendor fraud to fund her downtown condominium. She thought she was delivering a crushing personal insult, but she had just handed me a voluntary verbal confession to federal financial crimes. I allowed her final triumphant words to hang in the crisp afternoon air for several long seconds before I finally reacted. I did not yell, I did not cry, and I certainly did not engage in a petty screaming match in a hospital parking lot. Instead, I reached into the pocket of my coat with my good hand and slowly pulled out my cell phone. The screen was brightly illuminated, displaying the active digital voice recorder application that I had discreetly engaged the absolute second I recognized her approaching footsteps. I held the screen up so she could clearly see the audio waves capturing every single ambient sound. "Thank you for your profound candor," I said, my voice carrying a lethal surgical calm that instantly wiped the arrogant smirk right off her face. I just wanted to clarify for the official legal record that you are fully aware the luxury penthouse you currently occupy is being fraudulently funded by stolen corporate capital. I made sure the microphone picked up every nuance of my voice as I summarized her catastrophic mistake. I explained that ignorance might have been a viable legal defense, but her loud public declaration of knowing exactly where the money originated completely destroyed any chance she had of claiming innocence. You just openly admitted to actively conspiring with a regional director to embezzle company assets by posing as a fictitious corporate retreat vendor. The color violently drained from her heavily contoured face, transforming her confident expression into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. Her mouth opened and closed silently, as her brain finally processed the catastrophic legal implications of her arrogant boasting. I offered her a slow, chilling smile, stepping just an inch closer to deliver the final devastating blow. My attorneys and the federal financial auditors are going to be absolutely thrilled to add your voluntary verbal confession directly to the mountain of digital evidence we have already compiled against Brent. You thought you were fighting over a man, but you just permanently tied yourself to a massive corporate fraud investigation. Have a wonderful afternoon. The mistress let out a strangled, panicked gasp, stumbling backward in her expensive designer heels. She turned and practically sprinted across the asphalt lot, fleeing in absolute terror as she realized she had just guaranteed her own criminal indictment. The mistress's panicked sprint across the asphalt lot triggered an immediate chain reaction of absolute chaos within Brent's fragile ecosystem. Less than 24 hours after her catastrophic verbal confession, my encrypted secure phone received a barrage of frantic missed calls, followed by a highly aggressive text message demanding an immediate conversation. Brent had clearly extracted the details of the parking lot encounter from his terrified junior associate, and his sheer panic had finally overridden his carefully curated corporate arrogance. He realized with terrifying clarity that my confidence did not stem from a place of delusional grief, but from a position of active professional employment. He had utilized his remaining unblocked corporate resources to run a desperate background check, discovering the recent activation of my independent consulting license. He dialed my number again, and this time I answered, allowing him to immediately launch into a desperate, unhinged tirade. He was breathing heavily, his voice cracking with thinly veiled terror as he attempted to regain his lost authority through vicious intimidation. He demanded to know exactly who was funding my legal representation and which rival real estate firm had hired me as a freelance data analyst. When I refused to provide him with any information, he resorted to the most pathetic blackmail attempt imaginable. He explicitly threatened to track down my new employer and file a formal corporate espionage complaint. He claimed he would fabricate evidence proving I had stolen proprietary financial data from his regional division before our separation, and that I was currently selling those trade secrets to his direct competitors. He arrogantly promised to have my professional licenses permanently revoked and to drag my name through federal court, ensuring I would never work in the analytics industry again. He genuinely believed that threatening my livelihood would force me to surrender the audio recording of his mistress and sign the extortionate divorce settlement. I listened to his frantic threats with absolute silence, analyzing the severe tremor in his voice. He was blindly firing shots into the dark, completely unaware that the employer he was threatening to contact was actually his ultimate boss, Harrison Thorne. I did not bother correcting his massive miscalculation. I noted the exact timestamp of his blackmail attempt, adding his threat to fabricate federal crimes directly into my expanding dossier. He wanted to play the role of a ruthless corporate heavyweight, but his strategy was fundamentally flawed. His desperation was pushing him to commit entirely new offenses in his pathetic attempt to cover up his original embezzlement. Brent's utter lack of control rapidly spilled over into his personal life, culminating in a spectacular implosion at his mother's highly anticipated weekly family dinner. Naomi arrived at my guest house later that same evening, carrying a bottle of sparkling cider and wearing a smile of absolute triumphant satisfaction. She eagerly recounted every single detail of the disastrous family gathering, placing her phone on my kitchen island to play a brief audio clip she had discreetly captured for my personal enjoyment. According to Naomi, Brent had arrived at the dinner looking completely unraveled, heavily downing 2 glasses of scotch before the appetizers were even served. He immediately attempted to control the family narrative, launching into a pathetic victim routine about how my supposed mental instability was aggressively jeopardizing his impending promotion. Barbara instantly rallied to his defense, coddling her cheating son and loudly condemning my refusal to sign away the marital home. That was the exact moment Naomi decided she had heard enough of their toxic delusions. She stood up from the formal dining table, slammed her hands down onto the polished wood, and publicly dismantled Brent's entire fabricated reality. She loudly exposed his 8-month affair with his junior associate, detailing exactly how he had been parading his mistress around town while I was enduring agonizing cancer biopsies. She did not stop at the infidelity. She ruthlessly shamed Barbara in front of the extended family members present, exposing her active role in the hospital ambush and her disgusting attempt to steal a recovering cancer patient's equity. Naomi called Brent a cowardly, manipulative fraud who lacked the basic human decency to support his wife through a life-threatening illness. The revelation sent absolute shockwaves across the dining room, entirely fracturing the family dynamic. Brent's father, who had been blissfully ignorant of the depth of the deception, turned his profound disgust toward his wife and son, demanding to know if Naomi's accusations were true. Brent tried to shout her down, but Naomi simply laughed in his face, grabbed her coat and walked out the front door, leaving the family to completely tear themselves apart. Naomi poured us both a glass of cider, toasting to the absolute destruction of their toxic, enabling circle. Brent had relied heavily on his family's unquestioning loyalty to maintain his polished external image, but Naomi's fearless intervention had shattered that loyalty beyond any hope of repair. The pristine, unified facade of his supportive family was permanently destroyed, leaving him entirely isolated. By midnight, Brent was backed entirely into a corner, stripped of his financial liquidity, his family support, and his confident mistress. The sheer weight of his impending collapse drove him to make one final catastrophic error in judgment. My phone illuminated in the darkness of the guest house, signaling a new priority voicemail from his number. I hit play, listening as his heavily intoxicated voice filled the quiet room. All traces of his polished corporate persona had vanished, replaced by raw, venomous desperation. He was slurring his words severely, but his vicious intent was unmistakably clear. He explicitly ordered me to stay away from the upcoming Thorn Conglomerate charity gala, outlining a series of highly specific threats meant to completely terrorize me into submission. He swore that if I dared to show my face at the prestigious event and ruin his corporate introduction, he would unleash a level of destruction I could not even fathom. He threatened to drag my medical history into the public sphere, to violently bankrupt me in civil court, and to personally ensure I spent the rest of my shortened life drowning in absolute misery. He boldly declared that he was a rising titan in the real estate industry, and I was nothing but a pathetic, discarded liability, attempting to cling to his hard-earned success. He demanded that I crawl back into my hole and let him claim the executive suite he rightfully deserved. I listened to his deranged, completely unhinged monologue without a single ounce of fear. His attempt to terrify me only confirmed that my strategy was working flawlessly. He was absolutely petrified. He knew his entire future hinged on the upcoming corporate gala, and he was terrified that my mere presence would somehow crack the fragile illusion he was desperately trying to sell to the billionaire executives. I saved the threatening voicemail directly to the encrypted drive, archiving it as the definitive proof of his malicious character. I locked my workstation, turned off the lights, and went to sleep with a peaceful smile on my face, knowing that his corporate execution was practically guaranteed. The blackmail attempt was not a display of power, it was the ultimate symptom of his profound weakness. He genuinely believed that screaming threats into a phone would somehow alter the trajectory of the massive train bearing down on him. I closed my eyes, visualizing the exact moment he would finally realize the truth. I was not clinging to his success, I was the architect of his total annihilation. The heavy mahogany doors of Harrison Thorne's executive suite closed with a definitive click, sealing us inside his private corporate sanctuary. I had arrived exactly on time, carrying the final encrypted master drive containing the absolute totality of Brent's financial fraud. Harrison sat behind a massive desk carved from a single slab of polished walnut, looking less like a businessman and more like a general reviewing the final battle plans before a decisive strike. He gestured for me to take the leather chair opposite him, and I slid the drive across the smooth surface. We spent the next 2 hours meticulously walking through every single data point, every forged signature, and every hidden wire transfer. I watched his eyes track across the glowing monitors, verifying the undeniable mathematical certainty of my shadow audit. The numbers painted a portrait of a regional director who had grown so profoundly arrogant that he believed he was entirely invisible to corporate oversight. Harrison did not just accept my findings, he actively marveled at the sheer elegance of the traps I had exposed. He confirmed that his internal legal team had spent the previous 48 hours verifying my initial data dumps and preparing the necessary legal documentation to execute an immediate hostile termination. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers, and delivered the final crucial piece of intelligence. The executive board of directors had been fully briefed in a secure emergency session. They were absolutely horrified by the extent of the embezzlement and were fully backing Harrison's plan to make a brutal public example of Brent. Harrison then confirmed the final logistical detail that made my pulse race with anticipation. Federal financial investigators and local law enforcement had been discreetly notified and provided with preliminary summaries of the fraudulent activity. They were confirmed to be on active standby, ready to move into the charity gala, the absolute second Harrison signaled the execution. The guillotine was fully assembled, the blade was sharpened to a razor edge, and Brent was willingly walking his own neck right onto the chopping block. With the corporate execution flawlessly coordinated, I shifted my focus to the final critical element of my personal recovery. The following afternoon, I sat in the sterile white examination room of the oncology clinic, waiting for the definitive results of my post-operative pathology report. The anxiety that had previously consumed me in this very room felt strangely distant, replaced by a profound sense of inner fortitude. When Dr. Evans finally entered the room, her usual serious demeanor broke into a massive, genuinely relieved smile. She pulled up my scans and delivered the exact words I had been desperately praying to hear. The surgical margins were completely clear. The melanoma had been entirely excised before it could breach the deeper lymph nodes, and my body was officially cancer-free. The physical relief washed over me in a massive, overwhelming wave. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, steadying breath as the sheer magnitude of my survival finally set in. I was not going to die. I was not going to spend the next year enduring agonizing chemotherapy or fighting a losing battle against a microscopic invader. Brent had abandoned me exactly 38 minutes before this miraculous outcome, completely unaware that he was throwing away a perfectly healthy, vibrant wife to gamble his entire future on a fraudulent 24-year-old subordinate. My physical healing perfectly mirrored the intense emotional empowerment I had experienced over the past 3 weeks. I was no longer the fragile, terrified patient hyperventilating behind a hospital privacy curtain. I had actively cured the cancer attacking my body, while simultaneously excising the toxic narcissistic tumor that had infected my marriage. I walked out of the clinic with a clean bill of health and an absolute renewed lease on my entire existence, ready to step into the next chapter of my life, completely unburdened. The final preparation required a physical transformation that visually communicated my absolute rebirth. Naomi picked me up from the clinic and immediately declared that we were executing a hostile takeover of the most exclusive designer boutique in the city. She drove us to a private styling salon that catered exclusively to the extreme corporate elite, the kind of place where champagne flowed freely and the dresses cost more than a standard monthly mortgage payment. I walked past the racks of sensible conservative evening wear directly toward a section of the boutique that commanded immediate, absolute attention. I was shedding the pathetic, discarded sick wife identity forever, and I needed a gown that broadcasted pure, untouchable power. Naomi and the lead stylist pulled dozens of options, but the moment I slipped into the final dress, the entire room went completely silent. It was a breathtaking floor-length gown crafted from midnight blue silk that moved like liquid velvet, mirroring the deep, relentless power of the ocean. The architecture of the dress was flawless, featuring a daring, asymmetrical neckline that perfectly highlighted my collarbones and strategically concealed my healing surgical scar. It clung to my frame with lethal elegance, projecting an aura of supreme confidence and absolute dominance. Naomi stared at me through the massive gilded mirror, her eyes wide with fierce approval. She simply nodded, confirming that I looked like a woman who was fully prepared to walk into a room of billionaires and absolutely command their attention. I purchased the gown using the black corporate card Harrison had provided, a final fitting irony that the Thorne conglomerate was financing the very armor I would wear to execute their fraudulent regional director. I stood before the mirror, tracing the smooth silk against my hip, fully acknowledging the woman staring back at me. I was completely ready for the gala. The evening before the massive Thorne conglomerate charity gala, my phone vibrated on the marble countertop of Naomi's guesthouse kitchen. I had just finished carefully hanging the midnight blue silk gown in a garment bag when I saw Brent's name illuminate the lock screen. The message he sent was a staggering display of pathetic emotional manipulation. After weeks of aggressive legal threats, vicious public gaslighting, and explicit blackmail attempts, he had suddenly decided to pivot back to playing the tragically heartbroken victim. The long, rambling text message was a desperate final attempt to regain some semblance of psychological control before his pivotal corporate event. He wrote that his impending promotion was forcing him to reflect on our entire marriage, and he wanted to clear the air before stepping into his new executive role. He claimed with breathtaking audacity that he had always genuinely loved me, but watching my health deteriorate had simply been far too catastrophic for his own mental well-being. He actively tried to frame his cowardly abandonment and his 8-month affair as the inevitable result of immense emotional exhaustion, shifting the blame for his infidelity directly onto my cancer diagnosis. He painted himself as a deeply sensitive man who had simply broken under the terrible pressure of supporting a sick spouse, completely ignoring the undeniable fact that he had actively embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars to fund a luxury penthouse for his subordinate. The sheer narcissism required to send such a message the night before the biggest corporate event of his career confirmed exactly how fragile his ego truly was. He was terrified of the silence between us. My absolute refusal to engage in petty arguments or respond to his frantic threats had left him completely unmoored. He sent this pathetic, tear-jerking message, hoping I would finally crack, hoping I would respond with an emotional outburst that he could show to his attorney as proof of my instability. He wanted validation, he wanted conflict, and most importantly, he desperately wanted reassurance that he still occupied a significant space in my thoughts. I sat at the kitchen island reading his pathetic message for a second time, allowing the sheer absurdity of his victim complex to wash over me. In the past, a message like this would have sent me spiraling into a vortex of self-doubt and emotional agony. I would have spent hours drafting and deleting frantic replies, desperately trying to defend my character and force him to acknowledge his cruelty. But the woman who would have engaged in that toxic psychological warfare died the moment he sent his cowardly divorce text 38 minutes before my surgery. My data analyst brain immediately recognized his message for exactly what it was, a frantic attempt to provoke a reaction. He was actively seeking emotional supply, desperately needing me to engage so he could feel relevant. I refused to grant him the satisfaction of a single word. I did not type out a scathing rebuttal outlining his massive corporate fraud. I did not hurl insults or threaten his impending promotion. Instead, I opened the text message thread, navigated to his long, rambling paragraph of emotional manipulation, and simply reacted with a single digital thumbs up emoji. The sheer dismissive finality of that microscopic icon was infinitely more devastating than any lengthy response I could have written. By sending a thumbs up, I was communicating absolute total indifference. I was loudly broadcasting that his profound emotional agony, his fabricated victimhood, and his entire existence barely registered as a blip on my radar. I was letting him know that he was completely irrelevant. I locked my phone and set it face down on the counter, severing my digital connection to his pathetic manipulation. I knew that single solitary emoji would drive him absolutely insane. It would keep him awake all night, spinning his wheels in complete paranoia, wondering what my profound silence actually meant. He had attempted to wage psychological warfare using my cancer as his primary weapon, and I had just effortlessly neutralized his entire offensive strategy with a single tap of my thumb. With Brent's psychological game finally powerless over me, I walked into the guest bedroom and unzipped the protective garment bag, revealing the midnight blue silk gown I would wear to execute him. I stood before the full-length mirror, tracing the sharp asymmetrical neckline and the flawless tailoring that perfectly highlighted my healing body. The physical reflection staring back at me was an absolute revelation. I was no longer the pale, exhausted woman, hyperventilating behind a hospital privacy curtain, terrified of facing a major surgery completely alone. I was no longer the desperate, discarded wife pleading for basic human decency from a family of relentless narcissists. The surgical scar on my shoulder was a profound badge of survival, a physical testament to my absolute resilience. I had successfully excised the melanoma from my skin while simultaneously removing the toxic parasitic influence of my husband from my life. The woman standing in the mirror was a highly paid, elite independent auditor, directly contracted by a billionaire chief executive to dismantle a massive corporate fraud operation. I was the apex predator standing at the absolute top of Brent's professional food chain. The profound sense of empowerment radiated from my core, settling into my posture and completely transforming my presence. Tomorrow evening, Brent would walk into that crowded ballroom, desperately clinging to his fragile corporate facade, parading his fraud accomplice around and aggressively lobbying for a promotion he had financed with stolen money. He would arrive completely convinced of his own untouchable brilliance, entirely unaware that the stage had been perfectly set for his absolute annihilation. I ran my hand down the smooth silk of the gown, feeling the immense weight of the platinum VIP invitation resting securely in my evening clutch. The emotional turbulence, the fear, the betrayal was all permanently behind me. I was stepping into the charity gala, not as a victim seeking petty revenge, but as the meticulous, undeniably brilliant architect of his impending destruction. The guillotine was fully primed, the blade was gleaming, and tomorrow night I was going to pull the lever. The grand ballroom of the Downtown Plaza Hotel was a breathtaking masterpiece of corporate opulence designed specifically to impress the acquiring executives of the Thorne conglomerate. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over dozens of perfectly arranged banquet tables, draped in heavy silk and adorned with towering floral centerpieces. A string quartet played softly in the background, providing an elegant soundtrack to the ruthless corporate networking happening on the floor. At the very center of the room, Brent was holding court, operating at the absolute peak of his narcissistic element. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo that fit his athletic frame flawlessly, projecting the exact image of dynamic leadership he wanted the senior partners to see. Clinging tightly to his arm was his 24-year-old junior real estate associate, squeezed into a designer gown that was wildly inappropriate for a formal corporate charity function. Brent was expertly navigating the crowd, introducing his fraud accomplice to regional directors and senior stakeholders while smoothly delivering his carefully rehearsed tragic narrative. He maintained a perfectly calibrated expression of noble sorrow whenever a colleague offered condolences regarding my supposed terminal decline. He actively portrayed himself as the dedicated executive braving immense personal tragedy for the sake of the company, utilizing my cancer diagnosis to solicit maximum professional sympathy. He casually dismissed my absence by telling the executives that I was tragically confined to my medical bed, too weak and mentally unstable to attend such a demanding public function. He then seamlessly pivoted to praising the young associate on his arm, crediting her unwavering support for keeping his division highly profitable during his darkest hours. The mistress nodded along with his lies, wearing a smug, self-satisfied smile entirely oblivious to the federal trap she had walked into. She proudly showcased the diamond tennis bracelet Brent had purchased, using embezzled company funds, practically glowing with unearned arrogance. His performance was an absolute masterclass in sociopathic manipulation. He genuinely believed he had successfully insulated himself from any consequences surrounded by industry titans who were actively praising his resilience. He laughed charmingly at a senior partner's joke while taking a sip of vintage champagne, completely convinced that his meticulously plotted promotion to vice president was guaranteed. The air crackled with the sheer magnitude of his massive, unearned ego. He thought he was the unquestionable star of the evening, entirely unaware that he was merely the opening act for a catastrophic execution. The heavy brass doors at the top of the grand staircase swung open with a resounding thud that momentarily drew the attention of the security detail stationed near the entrance. I stepped into the archway, pausing at the top of the sweeping marble steps, allowing the brilliant ballroom lighting to catch the deep midnight blue silk of my gown. I did not slink into the room like a discarded sick wife seeking pity or validation. I stood tall, my posture radiating absolute lethal authority, completely dominating the visual space of the entire venue. The sharp, asymmetrical cut of my dress flawlessly highlighted my collarbones, and the faint silver line of my surgical scar projecting an image of fierce, undeniable survival. The ambient noise of the ballroom began to drop as heads turned toward the staircase. Conversations halted mid-sentence as regional directors and their spouses registered my presence. The woman Brent had just finished describing as a frail, bedridden, tragic burden was standing before them looking intensely powerful and absolutely untouchable. The silence rippled outward across the banquet hall, eventually reaching the center of the room, where Brent stood holding his champagne. I watched from my elevated vantage point as his eyes finally locked onto mine. The arrogant, confident smile he had been flashing all evening instantly vanished, wiped away by a look of profound, absolute terror. All the color violently drained from his face, leaving him looking like a panicked ghost trapped in a tailored tuxedo. He dropped the arm of his junior associate, practically shoving her aside as he frantically rushed toward the base of the staircase. He intercepted me just as my heels touched the polished ballroom floor, his face twisted into an ugly mask of barely contained panic and furious rage. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of expensive alcohol and fear, furiously whispering, demanding to know what I was doing there. He commanded me to leave immediately, insisting that I was trespassing and actively destroying his career trajectory. When I simply offered him a cold, amused smile, he snapped his fingers wildly at the two massive event security guards standing nearby. He aggressively ordered them to physically remove me from the premises, loudly declaring that I was a medically unfit, estranged spouse, causing a severe public disturbance. He expected the guards to immediately grab my arms and drag me out into the street, preserving his fragile corporate illusion. The two massive security guards stepped forward, but they completely bypassed me entirely, ignoring Brent's frantic, aggressive commands. Instead, they stepped smoothly between us, creating a protective physical barrier that forced my panicking husband to stagger backward. I casually reached into my evening clutch and produced the heavy engraved platinum metal card. The lead security guard glanced at the exclusive VIP insignia, nodded with utmost respect, and formally welcomed me to the gala, gesturing toward the heavily guarded inner circle of the ballroom. Brent stared at the platinum card in absolute horrified disbelief, completely unable to comprehend how his discarded wife possessed the highest tier of corporate clearance. Before his broken brain could formulate a response, Naomi glided past him, looking absolutely spectacular in an emerald green gown. She smoothly pressed a fresh glass of champagne directly against Brent's chest, forcing him to grab it to avoid ruining his custom tuxedo. "You look incredibly pale, Brent," Naomi said, her voice ringing with a sharp, mocking clarity that carried to the surrounding executives. "You might want to drink that before you completely pass out from the shock of seeing your actual wife looking 10 times better than your fraudulent little intern." Brent choked on a furious response, entirely paralyzed by the public humiliation as surrounding directors began to whisper and point. The junior associate scurried up behind him, looking utterly confused as the elite crowd suddenly turned their judgmental stares upon her. I did not waste another second looking at his pathetic, crumbling facade. I walked with deliberate, measured steps past the standard banquet tables, directly toward the velvet-roped elite section, reserved strictly for the Thorne conglomerate senior leadership. The security detail parted seamlessly, granting me access to the innermost sanctum of the corporate event. I pulled out my chair at the grand centerpiece table, ignoring the stunned stares of the regional executives already seated there. I smoothly settled into the plush velvet seat, arranging the midnight blue silk of my gown with flawless precision. I placed my platinum invitation on the crisp white tablecloth, right next to the empty prominent chair, explicitly reserved for the overarching chief executive officer. I leaned back and offered a serene smile to the flabbergasted regional directors sharing the table with me, completely ignoring their silent confusion. Brent watched from the outer floor, his chest heaving with sheer panic as he realized I was securely seated in the one place he could not physically reach me. The ambient lighting in the grand ballroom slowly dimmed, signaling the commencement of the evening's formal proceedings. A hushed, expectant silence fell over the crowd as regional directors and senior stakeholders turned their attention toward the central podium. Harrison Thorne emerged from the wings, moving with the calculated, predatory grace of a man entirely accustomed to commanding rooms filled with powerful people. He stepped up to the microphone, adjusting it with a simple, decisive motion that instantly captivated the audience. From my vantage point at the VIP table, I watched Brent sitting just a few yards away, completely oblivious to the impending execution. Brent leaned forward in his chair, his eyes gleaming with undisguised ambition and sheer arrogance. He was practically vibrating with desperate anticipation, eagerly awaiting the moment he could finally introduce himself to the billionaire chief executive he worshipped. He had undoubtedly rehearsed a sickeningly sycophantic introduction, preparing to leverage his fabricated tragic husband narrative to secure his coveted vice president promotion. Harrison began his keynote address, his deep, resonant voice echoing effortlessly through the massive ballroom. He did not launch into standard corporate platitudes about synergistic growth or quarterly profit margins. Instead, he chose to speak directly about the fundamental concepts of integrity, transparency, and the absolute necessity of unwavering trust in corporate leadership. He spoke about how true leadership requires not just business acumen, but a profound moral compass and an unyielding commitment to ethical behavior. Every word he spoke was meticulously chosen as a strategic setup for the absolute devastation he was about to unleash. Brent nodded along enthusiastically with Harrison's speech, completely failing to recognize the tightening noose. He believed the billionaire was speaking to him, validating his own twisted version of corporate excellence. He had absolutely no idea that Harrison was actively laying the groundwork for his public annihilation, systematically dismantling the very foundation of trust Brent had so desperately tried to fabricate. Harrison paused, allowing the weight of his words regarding corporate integrity to settle over the rapt audience. He leaned slightly against the podium, and his tone shifted from philosophical to intensely razor-sharp. He announced to the stunned crowd that the Thorne conglomerate placed an absolute premium on identifying and eradicating corruption, regardless of an executive's regional standing or perceived value. A sudden, uncomfortable tension rippled through the ballroom as regional directors exchanged nervous glances. Harrison declared that a brilliant, entirely independent auditor, operating completely under the radar, had recently executed a flawless shadow investigation into the regional division's financial ledgers. He revealed that this exceptional auditor had successfully uncovered a massive, highly coordinated embezzlement ring hiding in plain sight. The gasps from the audience were audible. Brent's enthusiastic nodding instantly stopped, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic as his brain scrambled to comprehend the impossibility of a shadow audit. Harrison detailed the auditor's findings outlining the fraudulent routing of corporate capital to fictitious retreat vendors and the illegal authorization of secondary salaries for unapproved personnel. He did not name names yet, but he described the exact mechanics of Brent's fraud with surgical precision. The blood violently drained from Brent's face, leaving him looking like a man staring directly down the barrel of a loaded weapon. His 24-year-old mistress sitting beside him suddenly looked remarkably ill, realizing that her luxury penthouse was the explicit subject of the billionaire's speech. Harrison then turned his intense gaze directly toward the VIP table, his eyes locking onto mine with profound professional respect. He announced that the Thorne conglomerate owed a massive debt of gratitude to the fierce, unyielding brilliance of the auditor who had saved the company millions and protected their corporate integrity. He formally invited Clara, the lead analyst of Apex Analytics, to join him on the stage. The spotlight shifted instantly, illuminating my midnight blue silk gown. I stood up smoothly, projecting absolute, undeniable power, and walked deliberately toward the podium. Brent's jaw dropped open, his eyes widening in complete horrific realization as he watched his discarded sick wife ascend the steps to stand shoulder to shoulder with his billionaire boss. The absolute silence in the ballroom was deafening. The realization that the brilliant corporate auditor was the very woman Brent had spent the entire evening describing as a frail, mentally unstable liability sent shockwaves through the regional executives. Brent sat frozen in his chair, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his miscalculation. He had arrogantly assumed I was a helpless victim, completely unaware that I had spent the past 3 weeks meticulously engineering his professional destruction. Harrison stepped back from the podium, allowing me to stand at the center of the stage, radiating absolute, untouchable authority. He placed a supportive hand on my shoulder, a clear public endorsement of my findings and my character. He then turned his full lethal attention directly onto Brent. Harrison's voice dropped to a cold, unforgiving register that commanded absolute silence. He explicitly named Brent, broadcasting his complete identity to every single executive partner and stakeholder in the room. He publicly terminated Brent effective immediately, citing irrefutable evidence of massive corporate fraud, gross misappropriation of company funds, and severe ethical violations. He did not stop there. He methodically detailed the exact nature of the embezzlement, explicitly exposing the fraudulent luxury condominium lease and the fake salary payments to the junior associate. He completely eviscerated Brent's carefully constructed narrative, leaving him entirely exposed as a cowardly, manipulative thief. As the final devastating words echoed through the ballroom, the heavy brass doors at the back of the venue swung open. 3 uniformed federal financial investigators, accompanied by local law enforcement officers, marched directly onto the floor. They bypassed the stunned executives and headed straight for Brent's table. Brent scrambled backward, knocking over his chair in a pathetic attempt to distance himself from the incoming reality. The officers moved with swift, uncompromising efficiency, informing Brent and his terrified mistress that they were being escorted from the premises for immediate questioning regarding federal financial crimes. Brent tried to shout a denial, his voice cracking with sheer desperation, but the officers simply secured his arms and guided him forcefully toward the exit. The entire ballroom watched in stunned silence as the regional director, who had arrived expecting a massive promotion, was unceremoniously marched out of the gala, his corporate career and his freedom entirely destroyed by the wife he thought he had discarded. I watched him disappear through the brass doors, pulling the lever on the guillotine with absolute devastating finality. The heavy brass doors swung shut, sealing Brent's fate, and the collective exhale of the entire ballroom sounded like a shifting tide. I descended the sweeping marble staircase with steady, measured steps, feeling the electric current of absolute victory vibrating through my veins. The regional directors who had previously offered me pitying glances or entirely ignored my existence now parted like the Red Sea, offering respectful nods and stunned silence. As I reached the grand lobby of the hotel, navigating toward the private executive exit, I heard the frantic, aggressive clicking of heels against the polished stone floor. Barbara pushed her way through a cluster of bewildered corporate guests, her face a chaotic mask of smeared mascara and sheer, unadulterated panic. She had clearly attended the gala anticipating a glorious public celebration of her golden boy, securing the executive suite, and was now violently colliding with the reality of his impending federal indictment. She threw herself directly into my path, practically hyperventilating as she attempted to physically block my exit. The vicious, cruel matriarch who had ambushed me in a hospital recovery room to steal my home equity was entirely gone. In her place stood a desperate, trembling woman begging for a mercy she had never once shown me. She pleaded with me to speak to Harrison, to miraculously retract the audit findings, and to save her precious son from the absolute ruin of federal prison and total irreversible bankruptcy. She frantically promised that Brent would immediately sign the house over to me, and that they would happily give me whatever financial settlement I wanted if I just stopped the federal investigation. She cried about how a prison sentence would destroy their prestigious family name and tried to reach out and grab my arm, attempting to force a manipulative emotional connection that had never actually existed. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice, and I certainly did not offer her the satisfaction of a prolonged, dramatic argument. I looked directly into her panicked, tear-filled eyes and delivered the most devastating blow possible. I gave her absolutely nothing. I did not waste a single solitary syllable on a woman who had viewed my terrifying cancer diagnosis as a highly convenient financial opportunity. I simply stepped around her trembling, pathetic figure and walked out the heavy glass doors into the cool, crisp night air, rendering her completely and permanently irrelevant to my entire existence. 3 months passed with the swift, refreshing clarity of a violent winter storm finally breaking to reveal a flawless, bright sky. The legal dismantling of my marriage was executed with the exact same ruthless precision as my corporate audit. The divorce was finalized entirely in my favor, bypassing any prolonged, exhausting litigation because Brent was far too busy fighting for his actual freedom in federal court. Facing a massive mountain of undeniable digital evidence capturing his extensive embezzlement, wire fraud, and marital asset dissipation, his defense attorney urged him to accept a comprehensive federal plea deal. He surrendered all claims to our marital home, relinquished every single cent of his remaining legitimate retirement accounts to me as mandated restitution, and officially began serving a multi-year sentence in a federal correctional facility. The once mighty real estate director who had arrogantly mocked my charity lawyers while bragging about his untouchable status was now wearing a standard issue uniform, completely stripped of his corporate titles and his grossly inflated ego. His family's highly curated social reputation imploded spectacularly in the immediate aftermath of his very public arrest. Barbara and her husband were permanently ostracized from their elite country club circles and were ultimately forced to rapidly downsize their lavish lifestyle as the exorbitant legal fees from Brent's criminal defense completely drained their generational resources. Meanwhile, my own inner circle of genuine support thrived beautifully. Naomi, having officially divorced Brent's equally toxic and enabling brother, leveraged the massive industry fallout to her absolute professional advantage. The severe scandal at the regional firm created a significant power vacuum across the city, and Naomi effortlessly capitalized on the corporate chaos. She negotiated a highly lucrative contract to take over a senior executive role at a prominent rival real estate firm, bringing her fierce intelligence and uncompromising integrity to a company that actually valued her immense worth. She remained my absolute closest friend, our unbreakable bond forged in the intense fires of taking down a mutual enemy. We frequently met for weekend brunches on the sunny patio of her new home, celebrating our shared liberation from a family that had constantly tried to diminish our light. I had successfully reclaimed my physical health, my financial assets, and my total independence, completely rewriting the tragic narrative my ex-husband had desperately tried to force upon me. The ultimate culmination of my new reality took place on a warm Friday evening inside the private dining room of the most exclusive five-star restaurant in the financial district. I sat in a plush leather booth wearing a tailored emerald blazer that perfectly matched the fierce confidence radiating from my core. I was slowly sipping a glass of vintage sparkling water while meticulously reviewing the final pages of a massive new corporate consulting contract. The Thorne conglomerate was officially retaining Apex Analytics as their primary independent auditing firm for all future national acquisitions, guaranteeing me a staggering multi-million-dollar revenue stream for the next 5 years. I smoothly signed my name on the bottom line, feeling a profound sense of absolute professional triumph. Harrison Thorne sat directly across the polished mahogany table, watching me with that same intense predatory appreciation he had shown since the very beginning. He wore a dark tailored suit and carried an aura of relaxed power, completely comfortable in the massive empire he commanded. We had spent the dinner discussing aggressive expansion strategies and data integration protocols, seamlessly blending our sharp analytical minds. As the waiter discreetly cleared our plates, Harrison leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. The sharp professional demeanor softened into something distinctly warmer and undeniably magnetic. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and slowly withdrew a pristine white cloth napkin along with a heavy silver fountain pen. He smoothly slid the napkin across the polished wood until it rested directly in front of my hands, perfectly mirroring the exact gesture he had made from behind that hospital privacy curtain when my entire world was collapsing. His dark eyes locked onto mine, sparkling with a profound mixture of deep respect and undeniable affection. "So about that binding promise you made to me in the preoperative ward?" Harrison asked, his deep, resonant voice dropping to a smooth, incredibly captivating register. I looked down at the blank white napkin and then back up into the eyes of the billionaire who had handed me the weapons to save my own life. A slow, radiant smile broke across my face, completely illuminating the room. I picked up the silver pen, feeling the cool metal against my skin, and confidently wrote a single definitive word on the center of the cloth. Okay. That one word was not just an answer to a joke I had made from a hospital bed. It was the closing of one life and the beginning of another. I had survived the cancer they thought would make me weak. I had survived the husband who abandoned me when I was most vulnerable. I had survived the mother-in-law who tried to strip me of my home, my dignity, and my future. And somehow, through the wreckage, I had found something far more powerful than revenge. I had found myself again. Brent thought sickness made me disposable. Barbara thought fear would make me obedient. But they were wrong. Pain did not make me smaller. It sharpened me. Betrayal did not destroy me. It revealed exactly who deserved a place in my life and who needed to be removed forever. Have you ever had someone abandon you when you needed them most? Share your story in the comments. And if Clara's journey reminded you that survival can become power, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for the next story.